Story 1. My wife remorselessly cheated on me and also got pregnant from her AP. AP? What does AP stand for? I never heard that one. For those who remember me, I'm the guy whose wife made our kids release a wild bunny in the middle of the yard after I advised her to have the kids take it to the bushes to release it safely. A hawk took the bunny right in front of both our children, 4 and 5 years old at the time, and they freaked out on their mother, then came running back to me in tears. Our kids started calling their mother the Bunny Unaliver. That name seems apt now, and other people called her that as well after her affair got out. Oh, AP means affair partner. Oh, kind of dry, but accurate. What happened with that poor bunny is ancient history compared to what I have to tell now. I'm speaking as a free man after finishing divorce a couple months ago. This is going to be pretty long, complicated, so buckle up, and that's it. That's the end of the story for that. So, when a nickname comes back to become more apt, that is, and I wish I could say the actual name, it kind of makes sense. But, wow, that's kind of not cool to release it in the wild. Take it to the bushes. Take it to the bushes. Let that rabbit have a fighting chance. At least that one. Story 2. No butthole in a peaceful neighborhood learns his lesson. So I live in a quiet town in the Midwestern United States. My house is the last house at the end of a sleepy little dead-end road. New guy moves in next door. Let's call him Dick. Dick was probably one of those guys who was so popular in high school that he thought he had it made without doing any work and tried to spend the rest of his life living off being the cool guy. Type of guy who drives a lifted truck and a motorcycle. Don't get me wrong, I ride motorcycles myself. What I don't do is sit in my driveway at 2 a.m. and rev my engine. Ooh. There's a bit of a downhill slope from the middle of the street to our houses at the end, and Dick likes to race down this hill, then lock his brakes and drift into his highway. The first winter after he moved in, I noticed that my mailbox had been crushed and there's fresh tire tracks in the snow leading down the street, over my mailbox, and into his driveway. A few days later, I see Dick standing outside and ask about this. He denies the entire thing and says he doesn't know what happened to my mailbox and that it must have been a delivery guy or something. I figure whatever and fix my mailbox. A few months later, the same thing happens again. I fixed my mailbox and moved on. Sometime later, this happens yet again. This time, I'm pretty ticked. So I talked to my cousin, who's a commercial welder, and had him make me a mailbox out of some scrap 1/4-inch steel plate, which was mounted on a length of old railroad track for its post. A little bit of glue and some cedar shingles, and you'd never know it wasn't a typical wooden mailbox. Also, the railroad track post was sunk in concrete 4 feet into the ground. For the next several weeks, I waited with anticipation every time I heard his truck roaring down the street, but nothing. Until about 4 months later, when I heard his truck, then a crash. By the time I had forgotten about the mailbox and thought for sure he'd struck another car, I ran out to the street to see if anyone needed help. And there was his truck, broadside against my mailbox, all smashed up. He saw me walk up and started yelling about how I had destroyed his truck and he'd make me pay, and he called the cops. A cop showed up to take his report, and Dick pointed out how my mailbox had been specifically designed to destroy his truck. I gotta admit, I got nervous at this point. The cop looked around at the truck and the construction of the mailbox, then turned back to us and asked me if I'd had trouble with my mailbox before. Oh, I explained how it had been smashed several times in the past year. The cop then said, "It's pretty clear what happened here. This is an obvious case of wanton destruction of property." My heart sank to the ground, and Dick got a smug look on his face. But then the cop turned to Dick and said, "I'm going to issue a citation for this, as well as reckless driving." You should have seen Dick's face at this point. He was boiling with rage as the cop wrote him 2 tickets and told him he needed to pay for the repair of the damaged wood on my mailbox. The metal was fine, hadn't even tilted it, but the wood camouflage had broken off. Yeah, exactly. I think I've seen a few do-it-yourself shows where they've tried to figure out how to best reinforce your mailbox. And this was just going completely over the edge on that, but it was kind of needed because, dude, how many times can you just fix your mailbox like that and expect someone to just roll over? Someone's bound to set something up. Does this guy not watch cartoons? I've seen this in a few cartoons, Looney Tunes and such.
Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 3. Boss's boss threatens to fire me. I accept and get himself and his friends fired. In January 2021, I began working for a very big American company in Europe. That was and is in the energy sector. At the factory plant I began working at, the parts of gas turbines get assessed for restoration and reworked so they can be used again. Every single part would cost several thousand when produced new, and hold for like a decade or so. Reworking cost like a fourth of that, and the part would be good for another 8 to 10 years, with more inspections, of course, for safety. The customers would pay like half or 3/4 of the cost of a new part, and since we talk 2 to 8K per single part, and a gas turbine containing thousands of pieces, we speak several million for each gas turbine. Customers would save a good chunk, and of course, the company was sitting on a golden goose. Over the decades, that meant that the facility where the stuff was reworked had an absolute uncontested income, without much competition, since the parts were their own design and production, and a win-win for customer and company. Over time, that led to the problem that competence, invention, or even honesty were not needed by the management of the facility anymore. As long as the workers stuck to the already developed and tested processes and did their job, money would keep flowing in regardless of what the office did or did not. You can see where this is going. Setup, somewhat important. So I was hired there as part of quality control. Specifically, I was to operate a 3D computer-managed measuring machine. Gas turbines get, as you can imagine, pretty hot and spin fast. And a decade of heat combined with dynamic stress has the nasty habit of deforming stuff. Can't have that for sure, so you have to measure the stuff really precisely so that the production knows what section of which piece needs reworking, or if a piece is too out of form to be used again at all. The operation of such a machine is not too complicated. Put the piece into a bracket, clamp it down, load the correct model, and start the program. You get the measurement report then as a text file, an Excel as well as a PDF. The pieces, usually rotary blades, nearly always came in sets, 24 to 216, depending on the size. When all are measured, you compile all the reports the machine made into one Excel with a somewhat complicated method. Wasn't hard. I learned all that in a week. The machine was immensely important for the facility, running in 2 to 3 shifts per day, 6 days per week. Like 80% of all the pieces that went through the reworking process had to be measured at least twice. As nearly anyone with a technical background can guess, operating a machine and understanding what it actually does are two big different shoes. When I started, there were only 3 guys that understood the machine properly, as well as a technician, Vladimir, who could actually fix codes or reprogram a 3D model, if there was a problem. Vladimir, however, was the technician for the entire facility, very busy guy, and when he had to come over, his time would need to be paid by the department, something the bosses didn't encourage, so to say. Of the 3 guys who knew the machine, Antonio is important. He had been working there for a few centuries at least, knew every nook and cranny, and while being a simple worker, if Smeg went wrong, he was the guy you turned to. He had a bit of a short temper and a very blunt language, but he was honest, open, and very fair. I myself am not the most social person, always held back with a brutal honesty, and I take my professional cold attitude a bit too serious, I guess. In general, if people share my principles of honesty, fairness, and taking responsibility seriously, then we get along greatly. But with people that are less trustworthy, I basically turn into an ice block. Not perfect, I know, but hey, I don't work in retail for a good reason. So the thing is, despite some heated arguments, Antonio and I really got along swimmingly. What no one knew was that Antonio had, over the decades, collected such a backlog of days off, overtime and whatnot, that he could retire 2 years early. And he was 63. He had decided to groom me as his successor and began teaching me every little detail about the measuring machine, how to fix stuff, how to do proper maintenance, why it did certain stuff, and so on. He was a perfectionist, but so am I. So I really appreciated it. What I noticed in my first week in the company was the biggest problem there. The facility had a massive problem with cliques, clans, and little circles. If you were part of the correct clique, you could do what you want and remain untouchable. If you aren't, well, your credit goes to anyone but you, and you are a fine scapegoat. I didn't care much about it, to be honest. I'm a bit of a rule fanatic and stick to them even when everyone else ignores them. For me, this was a well-paying job with a horrible commute, 1 3/4 hours in one direction. So I wanted to stay there for as long as I could, earn my money, and then just take the next job. There was a 4th guy who was operating the machine. I don't remember his name, so let's call him Igor. Igor was part of the same clique as my boss, Manuel, and my boss's boss, Freddie, and of course his own boss, Boris, who was also his brother. He was working the measuring machine simply because it was the most comfortable job he could perform. He was usually doing the night shift, and those paid extra. He occasionally took the late shift, while I always took the early one. Was the least popular, due to start at 6 a.m., but I liked going home at 3 p.m. Igor was, well, as a light bulb, he was like a wet match in a dark basement somewhere in a black hole. I might be a bit too harsh with him now, but that was all I ever got to see from him. He was also pretty lazy, rude, and arrogant. After all, he had an untouchable status due to his brother's best friend being boss of the entire assessment department. The actual story, long build-up, I know. A good 6 months after I started, there was the first incident with the measuring machine. We received the material in pallets, and it was the firm rule that the rotary blades had to be sorted in numerical order. Each had a serial number and a set number. Stuff went a ton faster and easier if all was sorted clean, 1 to 82, or whatever the set went up to. Occasionally, an order, which was usually 2 to 4 pallets, would arrive unsorted at the measuring machine. Then we had to sort them. Since we had to lift the blades out one by one anyway to measure them, it was not that big of a deal, just a tad annoying. Igor never finished a set if he could help it, leaving just 1 or 2 blades left for measuring. And even when he had to finish a set and start a new one, He would never compile the reports into one Excel. I'm pretty sure he didn't even know how that worked. One morning, I came to work, and like so often, there were just 3 blades left to measure. I shrugged without care and wanted to just finish the order and start the next. Problem was, the pallets were a complete mess, completely unsorted, despite them being measured. Igor had worked the late shift the day before and would also work the late shift that day, so I would actually get to see him for a few minutes when I handed my shift over. This, of course, meant that I would have to sort all of the pallets, while also operating the machine with the next order as to avoid a delay. The machine was a bit of a bottleneck in the facility. Usually, this is a chill post. The blades are never heavier than 22 kilograms, like 42 pounds, and you had like 6 to 14 minutes between the measurement cycles to lift them out and exchange them with the last measured blade. Sorting the last order took me 2 hours of quite sweaty work while also operating the machine nearby, so I was somewhat annoyed. When Igor came in the afternoon, I asked him in a polite manner why he had not sorted the one order. He replied in quite a rude tone that he wouldn't do that. I was a bit baffled and asked if he didn't know that it was mandatory to do that. He simply replied in a pretty rude tone again that he wouldn't speak about that. Outright refusing to speak about a problem? What the hell? I told him that if he didn't want to speak about it, I would have to speak about it with my boss. He just smiled in a smug fashion and told me to do that. Well, I did just that. Asked my boss about it in the fashion of, hey, I thought we were supposed to sort that stuff, or did we change that? This led to a 4-way talk with my boss, Igor, as well as Boris. Boris was not happy at all, and my boss was rather embarrassed, because it was all clear that I was correct, but neither of them wanted to admit that their friend had done anything wrong. I did my usual ice block impression, showing a blank face, replying in very accurate and short words, and staying all polite and professional. It came out rather inconclusive, with a kind request that we should please sort the pallets if they came in as a mess. Igor just shrugged, and it was clear that he didn't care. It happened 3 more times that stuff came in unsorted, but Igor managed to avoid doing it ever. Okay, strike 1. 6 weeks later, there was the second incident. Every morning before I started, I would maintain the machine like Antonio had showed me, cleaning everything and rubbing special liquid into stone tread the machine's arch ran back and forth on. One morning I came in and turned the machine into manual mode like every morning so that I could run the arch to the end of the thread for maintenance. A second, therefore, I heard a grinding noise and instantly stopped the machine. The arch was an air cushion-based runner, kind of like a hovercraft, as where the bottom of the arch would always remain a tiny bit above the surface to ensure minimum vibration. So a grinding sound is really, really bad. I quickly inspected the thread and found quite the deep crater in the stone surface, maybe 2 to 3 centimeters deep, like an inch, and wide. There was enough for the air cushion to lose pressure, so the arch was sliding over the stone surface of the thread. The inspection also revealed scratches along nearly the entire length of the tread, so it was pretty clear that the machine had been running nearly the entire length, had been running with this crater for a good bit. Immediately shut down the machine, informed Vladimir, as well as my boss, that some big stuff was going on here. I also took pictures of the damage with timestamps, just out of my usual paranoia. The machine was put out of commission as the arch had taken damage. The entire stone tread had to be reworked and the machine needed recalibration. It was out for over a month due to that crater. That crater, by the way, looked exactly like the bottom corner of one of the blade. as if one had been dropped onto the stone tread, and the previous shift before me had been, drumrolls, Igor. Of course, he denied that he had done anything wrong, and he could also not recall seeing any scratches or hearing any grinding noise during his shift. He tried to blame it on me, but I had reported the stuff for like 5 minutes into my shift, with the last blade Igor had measured still in the machine. Again, it was clear to all who had fracked up, but again, not even a harsh word to him. While the machine was getting fixed and reworked, we were put to different work. I got into the pre-assessment team, where the pieces got their first evaluation. I made good friends there, which would serve me later on. They would serve as my ears. Strike two. After the machine got fixed a good month later, we had collected a massive backlog, to the point that the other departments who did the repair were struggling to find something to do that didn't need measurements. The machine was supposed to work in 3 shifts, but Antonio had left for his 2-year vacation when the machine had been put out for repairs, and the other 2 colleagues who knew how to run and maintain the machine had left for better jobs. So it was only me and Igor by then, with me working some overtime for good pay, quite some overtime. All hogwash aside, hourly wage was really poor. One morning, I noticed something pretty weird. The order I had just started the previous afternoon was still not finished. Again, with just 2 blades remaining. Every measurement report has a timestamp, which I quickly had a look into. The measurement cycle for these was like 3 minutes, plus 1 minute exchanging one blade for the next. For some reason, the measurement reports from Igor's shift had like 10 to 15-minute gaps in between, sometimes even half an hour. Igor was still around as he had had the night shift. I knew he was a bit of a slacker, but these gaps were quite big, so I first thought there had been trouble with the machine. I asked him if he had any trouble with the machine last night, and he snapped at me that all had been fine. I asked if he was sure, and he in return inquired why I asked. I told him that there were quite some heavy gaps in between the measurement report, and that I couldn't find any error messages or sudden stops or such. Igor looked at those timestamps for a moment, back at me, and just shrugged before he went home. That would have been the end of it if it wouldn't have been even stranger the next shift, Monday. I had for once not worked on a Saturday, so Igor had 3 shifts in since I had last clocked out. I came in as usual, did the maintenance and cleaning, and wanted to check how far he had gotten. 4 orders had gone through since my last shift, so I assumed that, as usual, I would have to compile the reports. But there were none. I was pretty confused, searching the order's numbers, checking the machine protocol and all. The measuring machine had been running over the weekend with no shutdown or restart visible in the log, but also no measurement reports at all. I called Vladimir, as well as 4 orders worth of reports missing is a big deal. According to rules, I also informed my boss that the machine was at a standstill due to technical issues. Both Vladimir and my boss came into the measuring room, and we 3 searched for the problem. It took us a while to figure it out, simply to it being absolutely not expected. Someone had turned off the output of the machine. Maybe to avoid the timestamps. This again caused quite some ruckus, as all 4 orders had to be measured again with reports, and production was really struggling now to have something to work on. Again, all clear who had fracked up, and finally, Freddy had enough. But not for Igor. The malicious compliance, finally. The afternoon of the same day, Freddy, the boss of the entire assessment department, came into my measuring room, gave me a nice expensive suit, tie, polished shoes, and went straight into my face. I was currently sitting in my chair, compiling the results of the first order, when he stood before me, giving me no room to get up. he looked down on me and snapped at me that he was sick and tired of me bullying my coworkers. He handed me a letter, which were the signed papers of my contract termination, signed by him, of course, and he informed me that I had exactly 2 options now. I could either promise to do better, apologize to my coworker Igor and admit I was at fault, or I would be fired immediately. Well, the good thing of being bullied and terrorized for most of your childhood is you learn to keep a cool head under stress. So I reined in my first urge to discuss with him or to tell him that such was illegal. Instead, I took the letter and read through it before nodding a few times. Due to my cold professional attitude, I was known for often remaining silent, so he took my nods as my compliance. He informed me that he awaited my written apology before 2 p.m. All of the bosses went home by 2 p.m. and came in around 8 or 9. Well, when he turned around and marched out with a smug grin, he left me with a termination letter, with his signature on it. Fun fact, when both parties agree to it, a contract can be canceled immediately without any further responsibilities, besides paying for already issued hours, which go directly through human resources via the electronic timestamps of our clocking. I had 2 hours left until his deadline, and I spent it carefully cleaning up my workspace, making a backup of my work laptop according to the rules, and then, also according to the rules, cleaning the hard drive completely. The backup was put into the assigned server with all the data correctly named and compiled. But of course, the server for backup data is marked as unsearchable, as to avoid your search list getting cluttered. After all, the same parts types came in again and again, with the same material numbers, of course. If you knew the rules and you knew where to search, you would find the stuff within 20 seconds. If not, well, good luck, mate. It's only like 10 terabytes or so. I made a copy of the termination paper, signed by me now, too, and sent them to my email, which was allowed. Put the original back into the envelope and packed my things up. Then I went to the office, envelope in hand. The big boss showed his smug smile again the moment he saw me, but was quickly confused when he saw me with my laptop, work phone, and all that too. I handed him the letter, offered a polite nod, and turned around again. He shouted, "Where the hell was I going?" him still holding the envelope in his hand. "You terminated my contract, according to the rules. I am to hand over all personal equipment I had been handed by the company before leaving. Exceptions to paragraph B are safety shoes and safety glasses. I bid you a fine day, Mr. Freddy." I said that with a cold, calculated voice. "Oh, I bid you a fine day, Mr. Freddy," trying my best to sound like a lawyer, simply because I knew he hated my professional attitude. Then I went to my boss and piled my stuff on his desk. My boss was confused as hell, asking me what's up. I briefly informed him that my contract was terminated and that once more quoted the rule. My boss was a smug one too, but he wasn't all dumb. His eyes went big as he immediately realized that I was the only person he had left that actually knew how to maintain and properly operate the measuring machine, and that he had such a backlog already that other departments, relying on their measurements, had started to enforce short-time work. He was first lost for words and then rushed into Freddy's office to see that termination letter. Meanwhile, I changed my clothes in the locker room, went to the gate, and asked the security guards to please have a full inspection of my person and my backpack. This was likewise a regulation for personnel that was terminated on short notice, and while the security guards were pretty baffled that I asked to be searched, they complied. They searched me fully and handed me a written confirmation that I had nothing on me that belonged to the company. My now ex-boss tried to call me all the time on my way home, but I dislike having phone calls on public transport, so I simply muted them and continued reading my book until I got home. There, 4 p.m. by now, so well past his own time to go home, I finally answered his call. He tried to convince me that I needed this job and that all this could be sorted. My reply: I will have a new job within a week. You will need to take at least a month to train someone new on the machine, if you had anyone that could train a new person. I'll tell you what, give me a solid contract with triple the pay, and I come back. Oh, and I want a written apology from Freddie, too, as well as my piece when working. He told me that I was completely unreasonable with such demands. Again, me. So, to get this clear, 3 times I discover massive hogwash happening. 3 times you guys tried to heap the blame on me, and then you guys literally try to humiliate me, and Freddie does actually fire me. And you want me to be reasonable? Well, guess it would be reasonable then to just ignore you, then. Please, be well. I hung up then and blocked his number, as well as any other number with which he would try to call me later on. The aftermath. As I had mentioned before, I still had ears in the company, so I had a good idea what followed. The facility suddenly had its most sensitive bottleneck tightened even further, and then clogged full of concrete soon after. No one maintained or cleaned the measuring machine anymore, and being a precision machine, it didn't take that lightly. Vladimir was soon called in multiple times a day to fix a problem, which in return built up a backlog for him in other places. Things I, or previously Antonio, had fixed within a minute now took hours, just for Vladimir to find time to come over and fix it. In a minute. He tried explaining stuff to Igor, but it didn't work well. Other departments ran completely dry of work, and of course, they didn't want to bear the blame for missed deadlines, so the whole issue was quickly reported up the ladder. And with no one wanting to take the hit, it climbed higher and higher before it eventually got onto the desk of the national CEO of the company, the highest entity of the company this side of the Great Pond. Found that out via a friend in HR. What followed was the arrival of the proverbial unaliving squad. You know, the modern equivalent of an executor? Maybe I should start saying executor from now on. A bunch of guys in very tight suits, no sense of humor, cold eyes, and the strict command to find someone's head to put on a silver plate. As far as I heard, even a prosecutor from the USA was among them. I was called by the company a month later, asking if I could come in for an interview. Not a job interview, mind you, but they asked me to give my statement on the whole affair. This was an illegal thing, and they had no way to force me to make a statement, as it was an internal investigation, but I still happily complied, and even gave my signature that I told the truth. Gave them the entire story as accurately as I could, and openly admitted what I didn't know or where I was only guessing. They thanked me and apologized, honestly, I felt, that they could not pay me for the time they took from me due to legal reasons. I was all fine with that and went home. Igor got fired for careless negligence. Negligence? It says neglectance. I'll have to look that up. That doesn't sound like a word. Careless neglectance. It's usually negligence. His brother Boris likewise got the immediate boot in the butt. My boss went down under as well. He and Boris were fired for mismanagement. Their boss, however, Freddie, he not only got fired, but dragged in front of court. No idea how that went on, as he was dragged to the U.S. But given how ridiculous that justice system is, and that he had been designated as a scapegoat by one of the biggest companies worldwide, wouldn't be surprised if he had to hold very tightly on the soap for a good while. Ooh. The entire facility was firmly in the red for that year, due to nearly all contracted reworks missing deadlines, which means a daily fee of tens of thousands per contract. My years in the company soon sought new jobs, despite in one case being there for 20 years. Last I heard is that the company had to contract the producer of the measurement machine to train new employees how to operate it properly. I had asked for triple my pay. Well, those guys were more like triple the zeros at the end. Oh, and I did find a new job within 1 day. I was fired on Monday, had the interview on Tuesday, the test workday on Thursday. I was asked at the end of that day when I could start, which was the next Monday. I do manual measurements now, and in an incoming quality control department. The boss is a blast, the team is all friendly, and my commute is 18 minutes with an electric scooter. I have worked there for 9 months now, and I am already the de facto team leader for the first sample, and best of all, I am appreciated for the work I do too. That was epic. Again, clicks seem to rule, but when it comes time to do the actual work, guess what happens when that doesn't happen? Can't be bullied into it. And yeah, this person actually knew all the rules, not just the maintenance of the machine, and took everything very seriously. It is great that Antonio got out when he did, and considering that he still, I wonder if they tried to contact him. He was probably like, nope, I'm out of there. I'm gone. I'm using up my vacation days. Sorry. Nope.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.